We're going to be focusing this afternoon on resiliency. And it's interesting because, at least in the small group I was in, when we talked about what our group agreements were, a number of things came out that are really pertinent. And so in order to open up the section of the activity, I'd actually like to start by seeing if the groups would be able to share with us a couple of your group agreements. Is there anyone that could pull out what you wrote down and share one or two of the group agreements that you made? Do you know where they are? Where?
Our first one in my group.
Oh, right here. Okay, I'm so sorry.
Sorry, our first one was be clear.
Be clear?
Yeah, in our communication.
Okay, clear communication.
One of ours was encouragement and feedback.
One of ours was to be reliable, like really reliable, like be on time and be reliable, like if we had like safety concerns to like break that.
One more.
Be mindful of the way others feel and come to work free of judgments.
Yeah. One more.
Our number one was respect culture, background, and ethnicity.
Yes, respect for culture, background, and ethnicity. I like that. Okay, so to go along with that, one of the things that we wanted to look at, did we want to go right into resiliency? Okay. Is when you think about those agreements to be respectful, to support each other, those are ways that people as a team can build each other's resiliency. That's what it takes. The kinds of agreements that you talked about, to be reliable, to be people you can kind of count on to be there and to provide some of the basic needs that you would have. That helps us when we have an environment around us and people around us that support us in the ways you've identified. So let's take a look at, there's actually a page in your handout that's called Responding to Stress and Trauma. And let's talk for a minute about resiliency. How would you think about that term? Does anyone have any thoughts about what that means to you? For those who, so not everyone uses that term. It may actually be new to you. It's something that we have started talking about a lot because so often these days we focus on trauma, which is the negative side of something. Oh, I went through so much traumatic stress and it was so horrible. And what we've started doing now is we like the idea of saying, okay, we may have gone through that, but we also have a lot of strength inside and outside of us that can help us to be resilient, to overcome some of those things, and to be able to be as healthy and well as possible. Yes, Anton.
Sorry, starting.
Yes.
All right. What came up, and I don't know if I'm on track or not, but empathy, just like to constantly put myself in the empathetic position, always, understanding where someone that I'm speaking to is coming from first, before I kind of if I'm making sense, that helps me be resilient to feel some type of way, or being angry, or I would say I'm wrongfully emotional.
So basically, when we're able to try to listen and understand where somebody's coming from, that helps build their strength and makes them more resilient, to have somebody helping in that way. Other thoughts about what resilience means to you?
Your grit, your ability to overcome obstacles, and your ability to charge through the most
Yes.
difficult situations.
Grit, that's a good one.
Well, resiliency is, like you said, being able to get over something, like to get past it, to acknowledge it, and to move on from it, and just don't let it just be something that nags you all the time. But to break it down, I would say, like, to me, this basically reminds me of, like, don't ever let bad memories live rent-free in your head. It happened already. Don't let them bad memories, you got cheated on, this happened, you got fired, someone did something. Okay, acknowledge it. It might even stick with you for a second, but you have to get past it. You have to be mindful, like, thinking about this too much. So you can't grow if you steady looking backward, you can't go forward. So don't let bad memories live rent-free in your head.
So the question is, with resiliency, how do we overcome the challenges and the things that we've experienced that could hold us back or tear us down or hold us down? And there are a number of different skills that we learn that can help us to do that. And you described one of them, which is how you pay attention to your mental process and the self-talk that you use for yourself.
There was one more resiliency.
Oh, wow.
You had your hand up forever.
Me?
The right next to Misha. I don't know your name.
Cookie?
Cookie.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I mean, but he did say it though, it's bouncing back and mindfulness practicing. Like, our thoughts are very powerful. Thoughts create feeling, which create action. So if you follow a negative thought, you kind of go into an altered direction. But if you just continue to just know that you don't, okay, I'm gonna drop like a little serious bomb, but like if you don't identify yourself with certain thoughts, then you're able to move through them, and that would be like the definition.
So I'm hearing already that there's a lot of resiliency capacity that each of you has, that each of you has learned some ways to sort of work with yourself or work with other people that can help build that kind of resiliency. What I do is I want to move on now just a little bit, because we want to paint the picture of what happens to the human being and the human system when we experience traumatic stress, so that we have that kind of background, and that's what we're going to then go into some of the things you're talking about, as well as some other kinds of resources that we're going to teach you that, or give you an opportunity to experience, that will be tools that you can use and that you can remind your team and help your team to use as well.
So, as we transition into this dialogue right now, I want to draw everyone's attention. There's another handout. It's towards the back of your packet. We're not going to read from it right now. I just want you to be aware that it's there and you can have it accessible too. It's the chart with it's called the polyvagal chart. It says fight, flight, freeze. So just have that out. Know that it's there. Inside the booklet, there's some definitions on resiliency, stress, trauma, post-traumatic stress. We'll just talk a little bit about this stuff in context of going out into the field, in context of this work. So with stress and trauma, there's kind of two facets, and we can consider them the same for now. We'll look at stress and trauma as the same physiological mechanism. And there's two components. One is the stressor, or the traumatic event, and that's external. That's outside, that's in the environment. The other component is the internal response to that happening, to the circumstance, to the event, to the stimuli on the outside. So when we talk about building resiliency, really what we're talking about is we don't have control over what's going to hit us from the outside. What we do have control over is cultivating awareness around the internal mechanisms and the internal response to stress and to trauma, which is what was coming up in this group crowdsourcing of definitions already. So the human system right now, always, full time, we're constantly undergoing a process. It's called Neuro Ception, but the science doesn't matter. What it means is that our nervous system, beneath our conscious awareness, is constantly scanning the environment for cues of safety or cues of danger. So we're constantly scanning. And kind of when we get the gut reactions or the gut feelings, or we just have a sense that something's off, or we don't feel comfortable with this person, but we do feel comfortable with this person, that's a function of this process called neuroception. When we perceive something to be dangerous in the environment, it's not necessarily because there literally is danger in the environment. This is such a complex circumstance. It can be because of our memories, our past experiences. It can be post-traumatic stress. It can be that there genuinely is danger, or it can be that we're meeting a circumstance where we haven't developed the skills and the tool sets to meet the circumstance without reenacting our own trauma. Even if nothing's actually present that's going to hurt us, we might be at risk of reenacting our own patterns. So this handout that we pulled out from the back,
I actually don't have that.
oh, maybe we share with a partner for now, and one might be on its way from Leanne.
We got it.
Okay, we got it, okay. So the human system is naturally going, moment to moment, every day, we're naturally going through a stress and relaxation cycle. So I believe we've all heard of like fight or flight and freeze. And this is how the body responds to stress or to trauma. What we don't hear about as much is the state of rest and digest, or the state of relaxation. Sometimes it's called a social engagement system, or a social nervous system. So we're constantly moving through this cycle of rest and digest and safety, and then we move up into fight or flight. It sounds negative, but it's not necessarily. We actually need stress to power our daily routines. We need some physiological stress to get us up and moving. It's the component of our bodies that mobilizes us to play or to work or to respond to crying babies. So it's not a negative thing. When we are in genuine danger and we are not able to respond to the circumstance in a life-preserving way, we bypass fight or flight and we go up the bell chart, we go up into freeze. So freeze is a dissociative state, and it's kind of what protects our bodies from the fear or the pain of death. So we kind of have this cycle of going through this fight or flight, freeze, and the social nervous system. And what we want to do today is do a few resiliency exercises that'll help us cultivate the ability to consciously move ourselves down into rest and digest when we felt that we've kind of come up into fight or flight or into freeze. And we can use our neocortex in the brain to move us back down. Please do.
So as you can see, what Fredo was talking about was a process that our bodies go through that's just like breathing. It happens naturally, and we're not even consciously aware of it. And I think that's important. When we were in our groups, everyone was talking about the ways that you wanted to interact with one another, how you wanted to be able to listen, how you wanted to be able to support, how you wanted to be able to behave in certain ways. What happens sometimes when we go into the process we're describing, if we experience a threat, our system may react in a way that either creates a fight response which means that we might get kind of angry or a little hostile, a little aggressive, a little irritable, and we might have that kind of reaction. Everybody has their own unique way of doing it. So we'll ask you to think about for yourselves what's most typical for you if there is a threat that comes in your environment. Do you tend to be one of those people who will, get strong to resist the threat? Or are you the person whose reaction might be a little more like flight, where you'll tend to avoid it and go over leave the situation or do something to not have to pay attention? And that's your way of kind of protecting yourself. So each of these ways are different ways we personally have of protecting ourselves when we feel a threat. And if you're in a situation where, and everyone may have had these kind of situations as well, where you really weren't able to be aggressive because it wasn't possible, and you weren't able to run away, you may just freeze. You might just have to just shut down. And all of us have probably in one way or another experienced those three states. We may not even have really been consciously aware of it because the process happens. And what you're going to see, first of all, is you may see that process out in the streets on the part of people that you're interacting with. I know when I've been out on the streets, there's a lot of people that are very hyper alert. They've been through a lot of situations that were very threatening to their nervous system and their being, and they will come off really strong. I'll go along and I'll hear people with a very loud tone and a very kind of strident tone, or I'll see people and I can just tell they're sort of, in a bad mood kind of thing. And that is very likely coming off of they've been through a threat and they're in the kind of the fight phase of that. I know for myself, if I feel very threatened, I do tend to run away because I'm like really small and I don't see myself as able to protect myself physically, so I want to get out of the way, right? So I'm going to run away. And if there's a situation where it feels too threatening, somebody may just shut down and just not be responsive at all. No judgment on any of those behaviors. What happens when you're doing that, though, you're not in your rational state of mind, right? You're just reacting. And that's where we can help each other, because we want, as Fradel said, to get ourselves back to where we're calm, where our anxiety isn't high, and we're not in that highly reactive state. And one of the ways that works really good is to have a calm and friendly person there. If they've actually done some really cool studies on this, where they actually showed that if you had somebody and they were right there, they looked at you and smiled and seemed non-threatening, they checked it and people's nervous systems calm down. It's an automatic response. So that's why the teams can help each other really well with this. And it's also important to understand, because a team member may be reacting to something, either that there is a threat in the environment, and we're going to talk about all the some possible things that you might witness, or you may have a team member that looks at a person or goes to a situation and it reminds them of something in their past, something they've experienced personally. And in a trauma reaction, people don't just remember something, they relive it. So it's like it's happening right then to them. So you may have one of your team members or a person out on the street who you're interacting with, and what's going to happen is they're going to be into one of those sections. They're going to either come off and react automatically, a little more aggressive. They may come off and just like want to run away, and you might be talking to somebody and they just leave. Or they might just shut down. So the question is to be aware of that, and then to think about how you react yourself so you can be as aware of your own self and take care of yourself, to be aware of your teammates and how you can support them, and then what to expect out on the streets.